Marcus Johnson stood before his students, his left hand raised in graceful anticipation. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the music room's tall windows, casting golden highlights on the polished instruments. 30 pairs of eyes focused intently on his every movement, instruments poised, ready for his signal to begin Bridge Over Troubled Water. Remember, he spoke softly, his voice carrying across the hushed room, this piece isn't just about the notes. It's about hope. When Simon and Garfunkel wrote this, they understood that sometimes we all need a bridge to carry us through hard times. His students nodded, many of them having heard the story of how this same song had carried him through his mother's illness last year. The first gentle piano notes filled the air, followed by the sweet harmony of violins. Marcus smiled as Sarah Chen, his first-chair violinist, executed a perfect entrance. The piece was coming together beautifully for next week's state championships. His students had practiced for months, arriving early before school and staying late into the evenings. Their dedication reminded him daily why he'd chosen teaching over a professional music career 15 years ago. As the music swelled toward its first crescendo, Marcus felt the familiar twinge in his left shoulder, a reminder of the car accident that had ended his performing career but opened the door to teaching. He learned to conduct primarily with his left hand, his right arm's nerve damage making it impossible to maintain the precise movements required for orchestral conducting. The chorus approached, his students' faces intense with concentration. This was the moment he loved most, when 30 individual musicians transformed into one unified voice. The harmonies rose, pure and powerful, exactly as he'd envisioned. The classroom door burst open. Marcus didn't lower his hands, trying to maintain the moment, thinking it was perhaps the principal coming to check on their progress. But two men in dark suits strode purposefully into the room, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Marcus Johnson?" the taller detective asked, though it wasn't really a question. The music stuttered and died, discordant notes hanging in the suddenly thick air. Sarah's bow slipped, producing a harsh screech that made several students wince. "Please continue practicing, Section B," Marcus said calmly, though his heart had begun racing. He turned to the detectives, speaking quietly. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Instead of answering, the shorter detective produced handcuffs. "Marcus Johnson, you're under arrest for armed robbery. You have the right to remain silent." The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent room. Marcus caught a glimpse of his students' faces, shock, confusion, fear. Sarah had tears streaming down her cheeks. Tommy Martinez, his sophomore cellist who'd finally mastered his vibrato just last week, stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "There must be some mistake," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. "I'm in the middle of rehearsal for state championships." "The evidence says otherwise," the taller detective replied, already leading him toward the door. "We have you on camera at multiple locations." As they let him out, Marcus turned back one last time. "Sarah, you're in charge. Remember what we practiced. Bridge over troubled water." His last view was of Sarah raising her violin, her bow trembling but determined, leading the orchestra in a wavering continuation of the piece. The music followed him down the hallway, growing fainter with each step, until all he could hear was the sound of his own footsteps and the heavy tread of the detective's shoes on the polished floor. The courthouse projector hummed to life, casting a blue-tinted video onto the stark white wall. District Attorney Luis Rodriguez stood confidently before the judge, his charcoal suit pristine, his manner assured. "Your Honor, what you're about to see was recorded at Jade Palace Jewelry on March 15th at 2:47 p.m. Marcus sat motionless beside his public defender, watching his own image walk across the screen. The resemblance was uncanny. The same height, the same build, even a slight favor to his left side from his old football injury. The figure in the video adjusted his shoulder exactly as Marcus did before conducting, a habitual movement he'd developed after years of compensating for his right arm's weakness. "Note the defendant's distinctive gait," Rodriguez continued, his voice filling the silent courtroom. Our expert witness, Dr. James Torres from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, will testify that this walking pattern matches Mr. Johnson's exactly, down to the degree of hip rotation. The public defender, Alan Hayes, scribbled something on his legal pad without looking up. He'd spent exactly 23 minutes with Marcus in the past week, most of that time pushing for acceptance of the DA's plea deal. 25 years instead of 50, he'd said, his tone suggesting Marcus should be grateful for the offer. The security footage switched to another angle, showing the suspect writing a note with his right hand. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He hadn't been able to write with his right hand since the accident. But before he could lean over to tell Hayes, the defender was already standing. Your Honor, in light of the overwhelming evidence, we request a brief recess to discuss the prosecution's plea offer with our client. Judge Maria Elena Rodriguez studied Marcus over her reading glasses. Her dark eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Granted, we'll reconvene in 30 minutes. In the conference room, Hayes spread crime scene photos across the table. 5 robberies, Mr. Johnson. 5 witnesses who picked you out of a lineup. Cell phone records placing you at each location. The DA's offering 25 years with possibility of parole in 18. Given the evidence, this is the best outcome we can hope for. Marcus stared at the photos, his teacher's salary receipt from those days still sitting in his email inbox, unprinted. I was teaching during these robberies. I have records, witnesses. Records can be falsified. Hayes interrupted, checking his watch. Witnesses can be coordinated. The jury will never believe your entire school conspired to provide you an alibi. If we go to trial, you're looking at 50 years minimum. Marcus thought of his daughter Maya, just 14. In 50 years, she'd be older than he was now. In 25, she'd be 39. Either way, she'd grow up without him. The door opened and Rodriguez entered with his characteristic confidence. Time's running out on the deal, Mr. Johnson. 25 years. Time served starts today. All you have to do is sign. He slid a document across the table, his Mont Blanc pen following it. Marcus looked at the pen, then at his hands. The right one struggled even to hold a coffee cup, while his left had learned to draw music from 30 young musicians. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Truth stands when everything else falls. He folded his hands in his lap, the same way he did before every concert. No deal, Mr. Rodriguez. I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do. Rodriguez shrugged, retrieving his pen. Your funeral. See you in court. He paused at the door. Oh, Mr. Johnson, the jury selection starts tomorrow. I hope you like orange. You'll be wearing it for a very long time. The visiting room buzzed with muted conversations, but Keiko Yamamoto sat in silence, studying her ex-husband through the streaked plexiglass. Marcus looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his shoulders tight with worry. 3 weeks in jail had left shadows under his eyes, though he tried to smile for her. Maya's cello sits in the corner now, Keiko said softly, her hand pressed against the glass. She hasn't touched it since that day. She didn't need to specify which day. The image of their daughter watching the evening news, seeing her father's face labeled as armed robbery suspect, had burned itself into both their memories. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, composing himself like he used to before concerts. How's she doing in school? Keiko hesitated. 2 girls in Maya's class had spread rumors that Maya was hiding stolen jewelry. The school counselor suggested Maya transfer to a different school, but running away wouldn't solve anything. She's strong, Marcus. Like you. Through the glass, Marcus noticed the absence of Keiko's favorite jade pendant, a family heirloom from her grandmother in Kyoto. Before he could ask, a new voice joined their conversation. Mrs. Yamamoto. A guard approached. Your mother-in-law is here. Eleanor Johnson wheeled herself into view, her oxygen tank hissing softly. Marcus straightened immediately. Mama, you shouldn't be out in this heat. Hush, boy. Eleanor's voice was thin but determined. I raised you better than to tell me what I should or shouldn't do. She positioned her wheelchair next to Keiko's chair, patting the younger woman's hand. Despite their divorce 3 years ago, Eleanor had never stopped treating Keiko like a daughter. Now, Eleanor continued, Keiko and I have been talking. That public defender they gave you couldn't find his way out of a paper bag with a map and a flashlight. You need a real lawyer. Marcus shook his head. Mama, I saw the bills from your last hospital stay. I know what those specialists cost. Which is why I'm not asking you. Keiko interrupted. She pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal her collection of antique violin bridges, each one a masterpiece of delicate craftsmanship. Remember when you said these belonged in a museum? Well, Mr. Tanaka from the music shop agrees. He's offering enough to cover a retainer for Jun Park. The civil rights attorney, Marcus's voice cracked. Keiko, no, those bridges are your heritage, and Maya is yours. Keiko's voice was firm. Jun Park has overturned 17 wrongful convictions. He's already interested in your case. The security footage doesn't match your medical records. Eleanor produced a folded check from her purse. I'm selling the Steinway. When Marcus started to protest, she held up her hand. That piano's been collecting dust since your father passed. He'd want it to mean something. Marcus pressed his palm against the glass, matching the position of Keiko's hand. Despite their divorce, despite the strain of the past years, she still knew him better than anyone. She could read the guilt in his eyes, the fear that their sacrifices would be wasted. Marcus, Keiko said softly, remember what you always tell your students. Music isn't just about playing the right notes. It's about telling the truth through sound. Well, this is our truth. We believe in you. The guard called time, but as Marcus stood to leave, Keiko added one last thing. Jun Park will be here tomorrow morning. Don't worry about the cost. Just help him find the truth. Marcus watched them leave. His ex-wife who still fought for him, his mother who never stopped believing in him. In his cell that night, he heard Maya's voice from their last concert. Dad, how do you know when the music is real? His answer then seemed prophetic now. When it costs you something to play it, baby. The real ones always do. Jun Park's office looked like a composer's studio had collided with a legal library. Sheet music from Marcus's student performances covered one wall, while surveillance footage stills occupied another. The attorney stood before them, his reading glasses perched on his nose, conducting his own symphony of evidence. Here's what fascinates me, Park said, pointing to a calendar marked with red and blue pins. 3 of the robberies occurred during your senior center performances. The prosecution claims you could have slipped away, committed the crimes, and returned before anyone noticed. He turned to face Marcus, who sat with Keiko in the soft afternoon light. But there's something they missed. Park pulled out his phone, playing a shaky video. The footage showed Marcus conducting Moon River at Oakwood Senior Living. Mrs. Tang, a resident with advancing dementia, had walked onto the makeshift stage mid-performance. Instead of stopping, Marcus had smoothly guided her to stand beside him, letting her conduct while he shifted to the piano, never missing a beat. This was posted on Oakwood's social media, Park said, checking the timestamp. 2:47 p.m., March 15th, the exact time the Jade Palace robbery occurred. Unless you've mastered bilocation, you couldn't have been in both places. Keiko leaned forward. Can't you just show this to the prosecutor? Park's expression tightened. I tried. D.A. Rodriguez claims the video could have been posted with an incorrect timestamp. He has 5 witness identifications and your cell phone data. They're building their case on quantity, not quality. Marcus watched the video loop again, remembering Mrs. Tang's joy as she conducted. Her daughter had cried, saying it was the first time she'd seen her mother smile in months. What about the other robberies? Park spread out a series of photographs. This is where it gets interesting. I had my assistant catalog every piece of stolen jewelry. Look at this jade bracelet from the 4th robbery. He slid the photo closer. The thief specifically asked for it, ignored more valuable pieces. Marcus studied the image, then looked at Keiko. That design, it's like your grandmother's pendant. Exactly, Park said. The robberies weren't random. The thief knew exactly what they wanted, items with specific cultural significance, which made me wonder who would know enough about Asian antiques to target them, but not enough to know their true value. Some of these pieces were worth 10 times what the thief sold them for. He pinned another photo to the wall, Marcus's faculty ID badge from 8 years ago. You mentioned losing this badge when you moved. Notice anything? Marcus squinted at the image. Behind his younger self, barely visible in the background, was a familiar face at the school's front desk. That's Peter Chung. He was our security guard, retired about 5 years ago. Left for the Philippines according to records, Park added. But his son works as a guard at Metropolitan Museum. He has access to their Asian antiquities records, including valuations and private collector information. Park's eyes gleamed. And guess who else worked there part-time? Before Marcus could answer, Park's assistant burst in. Mr. Park, the prosecution just added a new witness. Someone from the school who claims they saw Mr. Johnson leaving during the third robbery. Park grabbed his coat. Name. Michael Johnson. Says he's the defendant's cousin. The room fell silent. Marcus's hands gripped his chair. I don't have a cousin, Michael. Park's expression shifted from surprise to satisfaction. Now that's exactly what I was waiting for. He picked up his phone, dialing quickly. Get me everything on this Michael Johnson. School records, employment history, family connections. Someone's trying too hard to sell this story. And they just made their first big mistake. Judge Maria Elena Rodriguez sat alone in her chambers at midnight, her reading glasses reflecting the soft glow of her desk lamp. Classical music played softly from her computer. Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, her favorite piece for late-night review sessions. 30 years on the bench had taught her that the quietest hours often revealed the loudest truths. She reached for her grandmother's old silver thermos of yerba mate, a companion through countless late nights. The case files for Marcus Johnson spread before her like sheet music waiting to be decoded. Something about this case had been nagging at her consciousness, like a wrong note in a familiar melody. Show me what I'm missing, she whispered, a habit from her early days as a public defender. Her fingers traced the timeline of evidence. 5 robberies, 5 witnesses, 1 cell phone trail. Perfect. Too perfect. She pulled up the security footage again, watching the suspect move through each scene. The walk matched, the build matched, even the characteristic shoulder adjustment was identical. But as she reached for her tea, her hand knocked over a stack of files, medical records scattered across her desk. A page caught her eye, a hospital report from Marcus's car accident. She'd initially skimmed it during pretrial, but now, in the quiet of midnight, she read every word. Severe nerve damage to the right brachial plexus, limited mobility, patient retrained to left-hand dominance. Judge Rodriguez sat up straighter, her tea forgotten. She rewound the security footage, watching each robbery again with new eyes. The suspect entered, reached for his weapon with his right hand, wrote demands with his right hand. She pulled up footage from the school's winter concert, submitted as character evidence. Marcus Johnson conducted with his left hand, his right arm moving with subtle stiffness. When he needed to write notes on a student's sheet music, he switched the baton to his right hand, awkwardly, like someone who had painfully relearned every basic movement. Dios mío, she breathed, reaching for her phone. It was late, but this couldn't wait. She dialed John Park's number. Your Honor, Park answered, sounding wide awake. This is unexpected. Mr. Park, the hospital records from your client's accident. Did you notice something about his right arm? The nerve damage? Yes, we're planning to bring it up during. Look at the surveillance footage again. Every robbery. Look at which hand the suspect uses. Silence filled the line, then the sound of rapid typing. Judge Rodriguez waited, remembering her grandmother's words about patience being the bridge between justice and truth. The suspect, he's right-handed, Park said slowly. In every video, he uses his right hand smoothly, naturally. But Marcus can barely lift his right arm above shoulder height, she finished. I saw it in a concert video. He had to relearn everything with his left hand. This is huge, Your Honor, but why are you telling me this now? Judge Rodriguez smiled, thinking of her own father, who taught her to play piano with the same patience Marcus showed his students. Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to ask for a demonstration in my courtroom. I want the jury to see Mr. Johnson, try to write his name with his right hand. Sometimes the simplest melody carries the strongest truth. She heard Park catch his breath. That would change everything. Truth often does, Mr. Park. She glanced at a framed photo on her desk. Her father in his judge's robes, the first Latino judge in their district. Justice isn't just about looking at evidence. It's about seeing what others miss because they're too busy looking at what they expect to find. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet. Be ready tomorrow. And Mr. Park, bring a pen. Sometimes the smallest props create the grandest revelations. The courtroom hummed with anticipation as Jun Park approached Marcus with a simple ballpoint pen. Mr. Johnson, could you please write your signature on this document? With your right hand. Marcus stood at the witness stand, aware of every eye watching him. He took the pen awkwardly in his right hand, his fingers stiff and uncooperative. The simple task of signing his name became a painful demonstration as his hand trembled, barely able to form legible letters. Dia Rodriguez leaned forward. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant could be faking this disability. Overruled, Judge Rodriguez replied. The medical records clearly document Mr. Johnson's nerve damage. Continue, Mr. Park. Park retrieved the paper, displaying Marcus's shaky signature to the jury. Now, let's watch the security footage one more time. The screen lit up, showing the suspect writing fluid demands with his right hand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, but Park wasn't finished. Your Honor, I'd like to call a surprise witness. Officers just picked him up this morning. Peter Chung, Jr., former security guard at the Metropolitan Museum. The young man who walked in looked nervous, his museum uniform crisp but his expression troubled. After being sworn in, he spoke softly but clearly. I knew about the valuable pieces in each store. I shared that information, but I never thought he'd actually rob them. Who is he? Park asked. Miguel Ramirez. He worked with me at the museum. Said he needed quick money for gambling debts. When he found out about Mr. Johnson's old phone. The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Park produced a series of photographs. Mr. Chung, is this Miguel Ramirez? The image showed a man remarkably similar to Marcus, same height, same build, even the same distinctive walk. But this man was writing smoothly with his right hand. Yes, that's him. He used to imitate people as a joke. Said he learned it working as a street performer. When he saw Mr. Johnson's picture in the school newsletter, Marcus stared at the photo, memories suddenly clicking into place. I remember him. He came to one of our concerts last year, said he was interested in the music program for his nephew. He watched our whole rehearsal. Park nodded. Where he would have seen Mr. Johnson's distinctive conducting style, his walk, even the shoulder adjustment. The perfect study for an impersonator. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Two detectives led in a handcuffed man, Miguel Ramirez himself. The resemblance to Marcus was stunning, down to the way he favored his left side while walking. We found him trying to pawn this, one detective announced, holding up an evidence bag containing a jade bracelet. Matches the description from the fourth robbery. Dia Rodriguez stood. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a brief recess to review this new evidence. Judge Rodriguez's eyes met Marcus. Granted. But first, she turned to Ramirez. Sir, please take this pen and write your name. With your right hand. The fluid signature that followed was identical to the handwriting from the robbery notes. In that moment, the truth emerged not just through evidence, but through the simple act of writing. One man's natural grace revealing another man's innocence. Marcus closed his eyes, hearing his mother's words echo once again. Truth stands when everything else falls. In the gallery, he heard Keiko's soft intake of breath, felt the weight of justice finally tipping in his favor. Miguel Ramirez sat in the witness stand, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his confession. The jade bracelet lay on the evidence table, its green stone catching the morning light, a silent witness to the unraveling of his deception. Please state your full name for the record, Jun Park requested, his voice calm but firm. Miguel Antonio Ramirez, he answered, then added without prompting, I'm the one who committed those robberies. Marcus Johnson is innocent. In the gallery, Maya grabbed her mother's hand. Keiko squeezed back, both of them watching Marcus at the defense table, his posture straight but tears gleaming in his eyes. Mr. Ramirez, Park continued, please explain to the court how you managed to impersonate Mr. Johnson so convincingly. Ramirez looked down at his hands. I used to do street performances in New York, mimicking people for tips. It was my specialty. Copying walks, gestures, mannerisms. When I saw Mr. Johnson at that school concert, he paused, swallowing hard. I was desperate. Gambling debts. When Peter mentioned the valuable pieces in those jewelry stores, and the cell phone, Park prompted. Found it at the school when I went to watch him. Someone said he lost his old phone. I took it, figured it might be useful. Didn't know it would track my location. D.A. Rodriguez stood. Your Honor, while this testimony is compelling, it doesn't explain all 5 witness identifications of Mr. Johnson. Judge Rodriguez nodded. Proceed with your question, Mr. Rodriguez. The DA approached Ramirez. How do you explain 5 separate witnesses identifying Mr. Johnson from photo lineups? Ramirez met his gaze steadily. Because I studied him. For weeks, I watched him teach, watched him conduct. I learned his walk, his way of adjusting his shoulder before he moved. I even practiced his signature, though I didn't know about his right arm being injured. Park produced a series of photographs. These were taken from Mr. Ramirez's apartment. Your Honor, I'd like to enter them as evidence. The photos showed walls covered with images of Marcus, newspaper clippings from school concerts, printed screenshots from the school's website, even detailed notes about his mannerisms. One photo showed Ramirez practicing Marcus's walk in front of a mirror. I made myself become him, Ramirez said softly. Or who I thought he was. Well, I never knew. He turned to Marcus. I never knew about your daughter's cello lessons, or your mother's medical bills, or how you spend weekends playing music at senior centers. I just saw someone successful I could pretend to be. I didn't see the real person I was destroying. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. Mr. Ramirez, you understand that this confession will lead to your own conviction. Yes, Your Honor. But watching him almost take the plea deal, hearing his daughter stopped playing music, Ramirez's voice cracked. My father went to prison when I was 12. I know what that does to a family. I can't let an innocent man's daughter grow up without her father because of my mistakes. In the stunned silence that followed, a soft melody drifted through the courtroom's open windows, the high school orchestra practicing Bridge Over Troubled Water for the upcoming state championships. Sarah Chen's violin soared above the rest, carrying the refrain that Marcus had taught them, a song about helping someone find their way home. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. In that moment, truth wasn't just spoken, it was heard, felt, and finally, after so many months, set free. The auditorium lights dimmed as Marcus Johnson raised his left hand. The silence held weight, possibility, promise. 3 months after his release, he stood before his students again, but this time was different. This time, Maya sat among them, her cello ready, her eyes bright with pride. Before we begin, Marcus spoke softly, his voice carrying to the packed audience. I want to share something with you. Music isn't just about playing the right notes. It's about finding truth in the spaces between them. The first notes of Dvorak's New World Symphony filled the air. Sarah Chen's violin sang the opening theme, joined by Maya's cello in perfect harmony. In the front row, Keiko watched their daughter play, tears gleaming in her eyes. Beside her, Eleanor Johnson sat tall in her wheelchair, oxygen tank decorated with orchestra ribbons, her face glowing with joy. Judge Rodriguez sat in the third row, program notes in her lap. After the case, she implemented new evidence review protocols in her courthouse, ensuring that every detail, no matter how small, received proper attention. She'd also started a music program in the juvenile court system, remembering how Marcus's students had played at senior centers. The music swelled, and Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his right shoulder. But now it was a reminder rather than a burden. His left hand guided the orchestra through the movement, each gesture carrying the weight of his journey. The students followed him with unwavering trust. the same trust that had led them to submit character witness statements during his trial. In the back of the auditorium, Jun Park listened, remembering the day Marcus had visited his office after the acquittal. Instead of discussing appeals or civil suits, Marcus had asked about starting a foundation to help others wrongly accused. Today, the foundation had already helped 3 families, with Park serving on its board. The symphony reached its crescendo, and Marcus caught a glimpse of Peter Chang Jr. in the audience. After testifying, the young man had left his museum job to study law, inspired by how truth could change lives. He now volunteered at Park's office, helping investigate other cases of mistaken identity. As the final movement approached, Marcus thought of Miguel Ramirez. The man's confession had earned him a reduced sentence, but more importantly, it had led to a program helping gambling addicts seek treatment instead of turning to crime. Marcus had written a letter to the parole board, asking them to consider Ramirez's act of conscience. The music shifted to the familiar theme, the one that always reminded Marcus of home. Maya's cello carried the melody now, her playing confident and strong. She practiced this piece every day during his imprisonment, telling him later that it made her feel closer to him. Now, as father and daughter created music together, they wrote a new chapter in their story. The final notes resonated through the hall, holding the audience spellbound. In that moment of perfect silence before the applause, Marcus remembered something his mother had told him in jail. Truth stands when everything else falls. The music had fallen silent, but the truth it carried echoed on. As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Marcus turned to his students. Maya beamed from her seat, her bow resting on the strings of her cello. Sarah Chen wiped tears from her eyes, her violin held close. They had all carried him through the darkness, and now their music carried them into the light. "Remember," Marcus said softly, though the applause nearly drowned his words, "every ending is just a different kind of beginning. The music never really stops. It just changes into something new." The applause continued, but Marcus heard something else. The sound of truth, of justice, of family and faith. It was the symphony of his life, playing on in perfect harmony.